1933, reminders of the Great Depression were everywhere. For more than 3 years, it had devastated the American economy. But with the inauguration of President Franklin Roosevelt, even cartoons began to reflect a new optimism. The challenge for Roosevelt's New Deal would be putting America back to work. And nowhere would that challenge be greater than in the city of New York, with its more than 1 million unemployed.
I looked with great anticipation to going into New York and just thought it was the most beautiful of cities and so great. And so I got there and I had the feeling, at last I have reached New York.
New York City in 1933, the biggest city in America, more than 7 million people. New York was the financial center for the nation, but Americans were losing confidence in capitalism. Banks were failing, the system was shutting down, and taking with it the dreams and savings of ordinary people. New York was a city of modern skyscrapers, but the streets below, designed for the horse and carriage, were now clogged with 800,000 cars a day. Ferries carried commuters where modern bridges were needed. Life on Fifth Avenue proclaimed the city's wealth. But 1/3 of New Yorkers lived in tenements. Immigrants from the old world crowded into the new.
It was ghetto, pure and simple. Not too different from the ghettos of European cities where these people had come from, but new to America. New York City just didn't have enough homes for the poorer element of the people.
Also moving into the city were black people from the South and Caribbean, making Harlem the largest black community in the United States. In these Harlem tenements and in the immigrant neighborhoods, the Depression hit particularly hard.
There was a kind of sense that everybody's having a hard time. We didn't have a feeling that some people were making it and some were suffering. Everybody had to compete with everybody for the scarce things that there were.
Pushing the federal government to aid the urban poor was New York Congressman Fiorello LaGuardia. Half Italian, half Jewish, barely 5 feet tall, he was a renegade Republican who had opposed many of the policies of Republican President Herbert Hoover. LaGuardia's district was East Harlem, a neighborhood of European immigrants.
LaGuardia was very eager to promote bills and to introduce bills that would improve labor conditions, that would improve housing, that would improve economic conditions. And I think that was characteristic of him all through his life.
But in March of 1933, the homeless and the poor lost an advocate in Congress. Defeated in the Democratic landslide, LaGuardia returned to a New York where victims of the Depression camped in cardboard shanties. LaGuardia swore he would give up politics, but few believed he would stay on the sidelines if Roosevelt's New Deal could help the city of New York.
History turns a page. President and Mrs. Hoover, leaving the White House after 4 trying years, greet Mrs. Roosevelt on the portico. The President-elect awaits them in the car in which he and Mr. Hoover will ride to the Capitol together. The retiring President and the new, the man who bore the burdens and the man who now assumes them. An historical moment in the life of a nation is approaching.
I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
The energy that was let loose right after that inauguration was enormous. Washington had never known anything like it.
Stylistically, there was just this abundance of movement and activity and a sense of let's get on with the problem.
And you felt that this guy came, he was going to save the people. And a tremendous feeling for him. Oh, the elderly people, they could kiss his toenails. That's how much they loved this guy.
I think he was primarily a person who was convinced that there was poverty in the country, need in the country, and he wanted to do something to help. New York had declared a bank holiday for the banks in New York, but Roosevelt followed it up with a bank holiday for the national government and throughout the country.
By early 1933, Americans were lining up to withdraw their money from a banking system on the brink of collapse. Roosevelt closed the banks for 4 days and pushed through an emergency banking bill authorizing $2 billion in new money to help pay off depositors. The new president went on radio with the first of his fireside chats.
I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days, why it was done, and what the next steps are going to be. I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington,
he made listeners feel as though he were talking to them and to them individually and alone. And this was a remarkable technique that he had.
Roosevelt would caress with his voice the microphone, and he treated the people as though they had intelligence.
Let us unite in banishing fear. We have provided the machinery to restore our financial system, and it is up to you to support and make it work. It is your problem, my friends, no less than it is mine. Together, we cannot fail.
I remember in those days, if you went through any area during the fireside chats, you could hear them walking down the street. You didn't have to worry about getting home in order to hear it, because it would be turned on all the way home.
We would ourselves sit down and talk over what he had said, and then we would look at what was happening all around about us, but still come out feeling good about it, feeling better than we had felt, though we had problems.
We were a serious country. The people had something to do with the government, and they felt in Roosevelt they had somebody who understood them, somebody who spoke to them. Other politicians found him mendacious and tricky, which indeed he was, but he was also had a direct pipeline to the people.
When the banks reopened, deposits exceeded withdrawals. Roosevelt had restored confidence, not only in the banks, but in the possibility of recovery. In the first 100 days of the New Deal, Roosevelt and Congress created 10 new agencies to combat the effects of the Depression. The alphabet soup of New Deal programs had immediate impact on the lives of millions of Americans. The first jobs program, the Civilian Conservation Corps, put 250,000 young men to work restoring the nation's forests. Roosevelt preferred a system of work relief to giving out welfare checks. But the president decided he had to push for direct federal relief, or millions would starve.
This was an absolutely new program for the federal government to be engaged in, that is, to be handing out relief. It wasn't much handed out on any level, and suddenly for it to be a major program with millions of dollars involved, with people getting money for nothing, as it was said by the opposition to it.
President Roosevelt has given me the job of administering the $500 million appropriated by Congress under the Emergency Relief Act of 1933 to help care for the 18 million persons whom the Depression has plunged from self-support to public dependency.
In his first 2 hours on the job, Harry Hopkins dispensed $5 million in relief funds.
I came to work for the FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, in September of 1933. We were a group of young people. For most of us, this was our first job. And we were terribly wrapped up in what we were doing, very excited about it, felt that the future of the world depended upon us.
So there was never any difference between work in the office and being away from the office. When we went to eat or to restaurants or go even taking our wives dancing that hot fall up on the roof of the Powhatan Hotel, very few people danced. They talked the whole time. We were talking about our jobs.
Eleanor Roosevelt would get literally thousands of letters a day. And poor Harry Hopkins would get the brunt of them, with my grandmother writing on the top in hand, "Harry, can't we do something about this person?"
With the government programs underway, Roosevelt turned his attention to the private sector.
Blue Eagle's loyal legions on parade. Soldier and sailor, millionaire and office boy, society maintenance shop girl, elbow to elbow in the NRA Army. 250,000 economic warriors forming the greatest peacetime demonstration in American history.
In September 1933, the government sponsored a spectacular parade up New York's Fifth Avenue to promote an unprecedented federal effort, the National Recovery Administration. Roosevelt called the NRA a partnership in planning between government and industry. Its goal, to speed recovery by establishing profit levels for business and wage levels for labor. In a show of national solidarity, more than 2 million employers across the country promised to abide by the NRA codes.
The NRA means to me a steady job with more pay. The extra kind comes in handy. I got a new job and it's great to be working again.
Thanks to President Roosevelt's plan, the NRA, which has made it possible for me to resume my position as a mannequin.
I am 100% in back of President Roosevelt's Recovery Act, and I want every one of my customers to know it.
The NRA also supported the right of employees to form unions and bargain collectively. Garment workers in New York City used the NRA to win higher wages and better working conditions.
It was almost enough for a president of this great nation to take account of us foreigners, which is what all of the union members were, practically without any exception, and acknowledge that things are bad and that workers are permitted to organize.
We must say that the NRA improved our needle industry. We are able now to make a living better than any time before. We